Hey everyone, this is Car Ray Rob, where I'm Ray.
And I'm Rob, and we want to welcome you to our podcast. Say hello to my little film.
Hey there, it'll be just a little while till Ray and Rob spit their spittle. Come on, check out of the hospital. So grab some of your best peanut brittle. This will be a darn good transmittal. And say hello to my little film.
All right, Rob, we are back with episode 18.
18. We are legally adults here at Say Hello to My Little Film. We're gonna get messed up. We're gonna get messed up.
We're allowed to legally vote now.
All right, yeah.
We can join the military.
Okay, less exciting.
Less exciting, but actually more on point with
Okay.
the movie I'm presenting.
Okay.
As you know, I'm a fan of Australian film,
Oh,
so I'm going to take you to the little town of Gallipoli, Turkey.
that's not Australia.
No, but this is an Australian film. I'm actually going to present to you, Rob, the 1981 film Gallipoli.
Okay.
Peter Weir directed.
Yep. Yep.
What do you know? You know anything about this?
I mean, I know Mel Gibson's in it. I am a
Yes,
Peter
but
Weir fan.
pre-crazy Mel Gibson.
Right.
At least we
definitely.
think.
Well, maybe he's always been crazy. He just hit it really
Yeah.
well. But yeah, no, I am a Peter Weir fan.
Sure.
I've seen many of his movies: Picnic at Hanging Rock, The
Truman
Poet Society,
Show.
Truman Show, Master and Commander.
Yeah,
So
done some big stuff.
yeah, I've definitely seen him. But this is a blind spot. So you have found a blind spot.
Yes, yes. Gallipoli is, it's a war movie, but one thing I like about it is like it takes a long time getting there. Like
Sure.
it's really, this movie's like really warm and
Uh-huh.
full of whimsy for a war movie. It's an interesting combination, and that's what it's playing up though. It's kind of playing like it's two like Australian sprinters
Mhm.
who have to come face to face with the brutality of war, the
Right.
reality of war, and as they go to this this famous campaign. I guess it's a little overlooked maybe in like World War II history from our perspective, but
Mhm.
this is like the big battle. I think if you're an Australian, like it's Gallipoli,
Sure.
it's where Australian they kind of it's a campaign that they kind of did to kind of help I think help Britain and help England and stuff. So
It's like their Normandy.
it's basically their Normandy. It goes maybe not as well.
Okay.
But yeah, so this one.
Spoilers.
Yeah, well, Mark Lee plays the lead. Mel Gibson is I think a co-lead, but maybe a little bit less.
Oh,
A little
take
bit
a
less.
back
So
seat,
Mark
Mel.
Lee's the boss here, and he's great. He just plays up this innocence, this this youth where you don't really think anything bad can happen to you, and he epitomizes that.
Sure.
Mel Gibson kind of more epitomizes like the reluctance that people are almost like thrown into the war. So it does a good job, like talking about making some of those points and having some themes to these characters, not
Mhm.
just shoot you up. Because to be honest with you, I'm not a big Saving Private Ryan fan. Like I'm not just a throw me into a war and I'm going to watch it and just feel compelled kind of guy. But
Sure.
this movie gets me. Won 11 Australian Film Awards.
Okay.
It was nominated for Best Foreign Film in the Golden Globes.
Mhm.
So it kind of did really well in award season. I think deservedly so.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. I mean, I know, like I said, Peter Weir is a big name in like Australian New Wave. So
Yeah.
like I do enjoy his film. So I have high hopes that I will
Yeah.
like Gallipoli. Again,
I
this
think
is
you
kind
will.
of like said, kind of fixing this blind spot for myself. Yeah. So okay, well, I'm excited.
Cool.
I'm excited. Let's do it.
Let's check it out.
Now's the time. Now's the time for us to do that. And if you have not checked out Gallipoli yet, we invite you to pause the podcast and go see Mel Gibson, pre-crazy Mel Gibson in a war movie. But if you have, stay right with us. We'll be right back.
Ray and Rob are currently watching the film. You may be also watching the film. If you're not, then you're listening to me say that Ray and Rob are watching the film. They'll be right back when they're done watching the film.
All right, everybody, we are back, not from Gallipoli, but just from watching Gallipoli. And Rob, you made it back in one piece.
I did, unlike some.
Most.
We'll get to that, right? Yeah.
That's down the road.
That is down the word. It's a journey, and the interesting thing I think about this movie to me, you called it a war movie, but you did kind of preface it a little bit. But I don't know if I would call this a war movie per se. It feels like it's like a movie, like you said. I think you said it takes a long time to get there. It's like a journey to a war movie.
Most war movies are about like being there and trying to get the heck out and go home, and this movie's all about no, we're going there. That's where we're going.
Yeah,
that's where we want to go.
Right. And there is that kind of you mentioned the word whimsical, and I feel like there are definitely moments of that through this movie, which is so odd for a movie that is a war movie.
Right.
And so I'm sitting there thinking the whole time as I'm watching this movie, does the tone, does that kind of tone, unconventional tone to a war movie kind of detract from the weight of it?
Right.
And I'm curious.
Let's discuss that.
Yeah, let's discuss that.
I do think there's a little bit about like this being an early '80s movie,
and
but
Australia.
Of course, and Australia, because I was gonna say obviously there's been some classic war movies that were very much, I don't know, very much like played up the violence of war and stuff. Where this is
the
realities of war, and this is a little bit different take on that. So yeah, maybe that's a bit of the Australian.
I think
side
it
too.
is,
but I think it's good storytelling too, because
it is.
For me, what like I said in the before section, like it's not the war that's always interesting to me. It's not the battling and it's the people in the war. And this movie takes its time to set up the characters who are going to. They're only in Gallipoli for less than a half hour.
Right. Yeah.
So the movie sets up like the characters in the war, and I think that's what I appreciate about it. But let's start with the characters. We meet Archie right off the bat, and he's a sprinter.
Yes.
Perfect. I mean, obviously, once you know like how the battle of this war goes, like perfect little character arc to make this dude a runner,
right?
But make them both runners eventually,
exactly because of the journey. Because the journey, it's like a long race to get to the war. It's an endurance race to get to the war.
Trench warfare is a race.
It definitely,
a
lot of races.
And I think Early on, Grandpa is his coach, or Uncle is his coach, and he's got that things that he says about his what are your legs? Like legs of steel springs.
Yeah.
What are they gonna do? They're gonna take me down the track.
Fast as a leopard, or something.
How are you gonna run as fast as a leopard? Yeah. Anyway, I love that. But the one thing I think as a viewer, right away I'm like, this is going to tie into the movie. Like this isn't just some random thing that Uncle is telling him. Like, this is going to be like a thing in the movie, like this saying, and it is
definitely.
But that's great writing. I think when you sneak that kind of stuff in there.
Yeah, I think they really got off to a really great start, building up Archie as a character. They kind of tackled a little bit of that like Aboriginal racism, with his friend that, defending him against the ranch hands, the obviously racist ranch hands that they ends up, running less. He ends up, running a race with.
I couldn't like him any less.
Right. And then he gives a barefoot race.
Yeah.
While Les rides bareback on a horse.
Right.
And so,
it's like a tortoise in the hare kind of thing.
It is a little bit for sure. But in that process, Archie just tears up his feet.
Yeah.
And he's got a big race coming up.
Yeah. And I think it's, you start to, they do a couple times throughout the movie, which I think again, good storytelling. They do a good job of like Archie just always thinks things are going to work out. You know what I mean? Like, all right, I'm going to race a guy. I'm running on my feet. I'm going to race a guy on a horse.
Right.
It'll work out. I'll win. And he does.
Right.
Running
through the desert in bare feet. Like, that's just a terrible idea.
Yeah. Is it the desert? Is the is that the outback?
Yeah.
Or I don't know how you would refer to it if you were in Australia, but yeah. And then, he ends up going to the race with his uncle, and he's got his bad feet. And his uncle's like, I don't know if you can pull out. You don't have to race here. And he's like, let's do it. And it works out. Like he has, and that's part of Archie's thing. He's this innocent character.
Yeah.
And he just thinks things are going to kind of work out. Like he's put in the work. He knows what he's doing. It'll be fine.
He's determined. He's very determined, driven to do what he wants to do.
And he does it. And I think, that's, and so in some ways it ends up being a flaw.
Yeah.
That we, kind of manifests into a flaw almost at the end of the movie. But
for sure. Well, and then you have that opposite, which is Frank.
Right.
Which
Mel
is
Gibson.
Not super motivated. He works on the railroad. He's got this kind of like gang of friends.
Yeah.
And they're all planning, okay, well, we're going to enlist. It seems like everybody's doing
That's
it. We got to do it. It's like we got to do it.
Archie has talked about wanting to enlist, but he's way too young.
Right. So with, and then they all like jump a train
Yeah,
and like
just-
escape their jobs, which
Yeah.
I thought was really funny. I'm like,
are we allowed to do this? Can't
Right.
you just quit?
right? Like, but I guess they need a way out. You know,
Yeah.
they're probably out there on the railway somewhere, you
Right.
know, and it's like they need a way back to town. So we're gonna jump this train, and their boss is like, "Wait a minute!" Like, that's probably one of the funniest parts of the movie for me. I was like, all these guys jumping on this train to quit
See
their
ya.
job.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we find out Frank is also a sprinter.
Right.
Because he ends up at the race where Archie is running and ends up entering as well, putting up all this money on himself.
20 quid,
20 quid.
which I don't know what that is,
Right.
but like I have no.
I'm not sure either,
Yeah.
to be perfectly honest. I hear that
It was a lot.
Pounds, pence, quarter, or I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not even going to pretend.
blind
that I
spot in my
understand
knowledge of
exactly
currency, but
pounds,
it was a lot at the
Um,
time. This
yes.
is 1915, and it was
Right.
a lot to Frank at the very least.
at the very least. So, but he obviously, as you said, it worked out for Archie, not so much for Frank.
Yep.
And he loses all of his money, and he just doesn't have a whole lot of options. But he does end up befriending Archie.
Yeah,
Uh,
almost out of just like I needed breakfast. He's like, you know,
Right.
he's gonna. We see him the next day. He's like leaving his hotel, and he wants to skip out on the bill, but like is forced to pay it. Then he
Mhm.
goes to a restaurant. He sees Archie there, and he's like, oh gosh, I have to
Right.
get some food. So I'm gonna start talking to this guy, and then a true friendship does
Definitely,
bloom.
definitely. But even I should say, right, we touch ahead of ourselves. We come back back to the race because I have to mention they've rolled out a Trojan horse to try to get guys to enlist into the army.
Well,
I thought that was a bit crazy.
Yeah, that worked out for the Greek though, so it's
I
not
bet-
a great. Yeah,
I guess it was just such a funny thing to like see them wheel out this Trojan horse
Right.
to like try to like that is some crazy enlistment tactics right there.
yeah, we're desperate. We need people. But
Right.
then that was the upper echelon, like the light horses they were called. That's where
Right.
Archie wanted to join because
Right.
Archie is a wrangler, a horse wrangler. That's where we kind of first see him, and he's he's good at riding horses. He'll be perfect for this thing, and that's an important setup for this movie too.
Yes.
Um,
And he's in that event after the race, he tells his uncle he's not going back home. He is going to enlist,
yeah,
which the uncle seemed to know in the back of his mind.
but yeah, and it's funny, like Uncle's supportive, but hesitant. You know what I mean? He's
Sure,
like,
yeah, you know,
because he wanted him to go home. He's like, well, I know your bag's packed way too heavy for this 2 days, but he was saying like, let's go home and let's rate. You know, he doesn't want him to go.
no,
you
not at
know,
all.
but-
But when Archie tries to sign up, Les rears his ugly head again.
Les is back.
And Les is enlisting and outs that Archie is underage, and they turn him away. And so,
Yeah.
he does like make off with the horse for a minute, which
Right,
is
because
kinda
he was
funny.
convinced if they see me ride, they'll let me in. They
Right.
see him ride, like, no, you're too young. See.
No, get out of here.
And that's actually then when he meets Frank, and then it's Frank's idea to like, well, just try again. He's like, I can't try again. They know how old I am. He's
Right.
like, try again somewhere else.
Right, I'll take him to
Oh,
Perth.
I
So
never
we're
would
gonna
have
go to
thought of that.
Yep.
But they eventually get to Perth. There's a little bit of a getting on the wrong train,
Yeah, but-
crossing the desert.
Exactly, and then they end up. That part was so funny to me. So they get on this train. They end up in a car. I'm like, okay, we're gonna make it to Perth. They go to sleep. They wake up. They've dropped that. Like the train has clearly dropped this car off at a deserted or like a practically deserted
Yeah.
train station.
No idea why the
Right.
train would go there.
Right, and the guy they get out and like, oh, where do we go? Like 2 weeks. It's gonna be 2 weeks before another train comes through. So the guy's like, you can go across this 50-mile wide dried up lake and
Yeah.
get to another side, and there's more trains over there.
And again, Archie's like,
Oh.
sure.
Yeah, and he just takes off.
Because
Like you said,
Archie
that
always
termination.
thinks things are going to work
Right.
out. It's, yep.
So
He's like, I
Frank
can
follows
handle
him.
it.
Yeah, and Frank follows him, and Archie knows how to navigate by the sun, so it's very good, good skills.
Yeah.
To be able to have in a situation like that. But man, they run it when they finally kind of like get close to the end of their journey. It's kind of getting there. They meet this guy out in the middle of the desert, and he is hilarious.
Yeah, I guess he lives in the desert. He
I don't
doesn't seem
know.
really connected.
Is
He's a
he
nomad.
real?
Yeah.
Like, I think he's real. I'm pretty sure he's real. But yeah, it's so they talk to him about the war, and he is just completely disconnected from the rest of the world. He's like, "We're at war? Really? With who?"
Like Germany. Like, the Germans are here already, huh? It's like, well, they're not fighting us.
Right. And he's like, "Well, what? It's not our war. What are you doing?" And like, "Well, if they take Europe, they'll we could be next, or they could come take this, and he's like, they're welcome to it.
Yeah,
It's just this man who like
let
lives in the
them
desert.
have it. Yeah, and they're welcome to it. Great line. But and great, like, odd, weird, funny character, but serving a point too, because there is something about this Gallipoli campaign in Turkey, right? So they're
Right.
Australia. This is World War II, and we're
Yeah.
talking about Turkey and Australia. They were like, you guys were in World War II, and it kind of feels like some of the people in Australia are like, wait, we're at war with who? You know?
Right,
And
yeah.
that's what this guy's like. He's like, we're fighting the Germans? No, we're fighting Turkey. Why
Yeah.
are we fighting Turkey? And Frank's loving this. Mel Gibson's character is loving this because he doesn't want to go to the war for
Right.
these same
He has no
reasons.
plan
He's
to
like,
go to
this
war,
isn't
yeah.
our war. Like,
Yeah.
why are, and him and Archie have bickered about this a little bit through this point of the movie. And so this guy's kind of just reinforcing
Yeah.
Frank's viewpoints of like, why would we do this?
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting too to kind of like put things in perspective because obviously this guy's completely disconnected from the world. He has no idea what's going on. But to be fair, like the world was so much more disconnected than it is now.
Oh yeah.
Then in 1915, you think about like our age now. It's so hard not to know what's going on in the world because
Right.
it's literally everywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's your fingertips.
Whether what you know is true or not is debatable.
Fair
but...
enough, absolutely. But with this, it's like the information just moves so slow.
Yeah, it's
so
the opposite.
right. So it's not surprising to me not only that this guy wouldn't know what's going on in the world, but hell, a lot of probably people in Australia didn't know what was going on. Like you
Right.
said, like is we're at war with what's going on. So yeah, I thought that it was a good representation of that.
Yeah.
Because obviously this was made in the 80s, right?
81?
81, you
Yeah.
think you said? Yeah. So it's like, at that point, obviously information moved faster, but still not as
yeah.
fast as now. But it's again kind of an interesting way to
Yeah,
think about
and
it.
I do think a
being
big
so
part of this.
disconnected.
Yeah, I do think a big part of this movie is about fighting other people's wars, and we've kind of talked about that before, and that's
Definitely.
this is almost like the living personification. Like we're Australia, we're helping England fight the Germanys, and we're going to fight Turkey, who's helping Germany. Like this is literally like fighting your country's fighting other people's wars, and a citizen of your country, like you're being kind of forced to fight this war.
Yeah.
That you're not sure about. So it's I think the movie does a good job of just kind of introducing to a character here and a character there, giving some different viewpoints in passing.
Yeah.
Because the next family, they once they get out of the desert, they meet this like really nice uppity family, kind of
Right.
host them up, and they're pro like
Yeah,
brave men fighting wars.
In fact,
very
like,
1915.
Frank is like very like into the daughter.
Yeah.
And then at dinner that night when they're there, they find out that Archie's planning on joining the Light Horses, and it's like he's getting like a hero's welcome.
Right.
And the daughter's like practically fawning all over him, and Frank's like, "Wait a minute, I want to be fawned over."
Yeah.
So that's when you kind of start seeing that shift in Frank of like, well, maybe I should do this.
Right.
And
he
obviously-
starts to see a path like I could make this make sense because I can kind of maybe this is my I think he tells his dad because then eventually they get next to Frank's dad once they get to Perth, and it's Frank's dad's not supportive of going to war, similar to what Frank
Right.
is, and
for a different reason.
yeah,
though.
absolutely. That's kind of what I was trying to say earlier. Like they get these different viewpoints of what people think is war, and Frank is, I guess, was it Irish?
Irish, yeah. He was
They were Irish, and so I'm not sure Mel Gibson did an Irish accent, but
No, I think I don't think
yeah.
he was Irish.
Yeah.
I think he was born in Australia, but I think it's like his family is from like descendants are from. Yeah.
And then I guess his uncle or whatever died or killed by the British in some form or fashion. So he's like, why would you go fight their war? He's like, this isn't their war, Dad. And now he's just kind of saying the company line to make this work. But he tells his dad, like, this is my path to, go there for a little bit, come back, become an officer and like have some stake in life. And I feel like, it's so interesting when I think you think back to like why people went to war. Like you kind of think about like, obviously drafts and stuff when we had to do it, but like there was this vigor about going to war and serving your country. And there was this real pride there. And that's Archie, in this movie. Archie has that pride, and he says like, I couldn't look at myself if I didn't go to this war.
Right.
But that's not Frank. Frank's like,
No.
I can do this to up my station.
Yeah.
And I think both viewpoints are like probably more the truth. It wasn't all like everybody in the Civil War was a hero and wanted,
Right.
Some were forced to do it. Some did it because there's no other way to advance in life. Like there was lots of reasons, and I'm not trying to diminish what any of those people did, but I think it's a fairer representation, is what I'm trying to say.
I don't disagree at all with that, and I think also the idea of the rich versus the poor
Right.
in war, and like how it affects them, And I know other movies have definitely tackled this before, and I think this one kind of does it in an interesting way. And I think this is kind of where you start seeing it a little bit, because it's the whole idea of the light horses versus the infantry.
Right.
So Archie wants to join the light horses, and it seems very much that the light horses are more of like a higher stationed regiment. So it's like the richer kids, probably because of their
they ride horses.
They ride horses and things like that. It just they're more likely to become part of the light horses.
Right.
Whereas the regular Joe ends up being part of the infantry, and that's not what Frank wants to do. He does not want to go to war and be part of the infantry. He wants to be part of the light horses.
He'll only go if he can be part of the infantry.
But he doesn't know how to ride a horse.
Light horses. Can't ride a horse.
So Archie tries to teach him.
Yep.
And it doesn't really work out.
No,
but
and I think that scene's interesting a little bit. So they try out. They got to give a fake name, and Archie gives Lascelles, which is what he's kind of referred to for the rest of the movie, and that's this sprinter that he kind of idolizes. And then Frank puts fake hair on him, makes him look older and stuff, hilarious. And he gets through the line and he makes it. He's in. And then when it's Frank's turn, I don't know if there's some ambiguity here, but like Frank gets on the horse and he just says go, and the horse doesn't go, and Archie's like kick it, like this is what we practice. And I think like does Frank bail, or is he just that bad at riding horses, or does he bail?
That's hard to tell.
I every time I watch it, I kind of feel a little bit more like he's so stiff. He's just like, no, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think I might agree if like his ultimate fate didn't end up happening, because so as you said, he fails his test. He doesn't get to join the Light Riders. Archie does, and this is kind of where they split. Where they kind of split off in the movie. And it's interesting because they start the movie with Archie.
Yep.
And then when this split happens, they stay with Frank. Right. They don't go with Archie.
Right. So
Frank ends up, running into his railway buddies who are joining infantry. So they're like at the bar and they're like, "Oh, this is our last night, and like you buy us around, we're gonna join the infantry."
Of course I will. Let's have fun.
Yeah. And then they ultimately end up getting him to join the infantry.
All we see is next morning they're doing their medical checks and Frank's in line with them.
Yeah.
So
that's what I think. Like I think he just genuinely wasn't able to get the horse to do what he wanted it to do, because I think if he failed, I think he would have just not done the infantry thing either. That's just me personally.
Yeah, it makes sense. It connects. Again, what are his options in life and what's he gonna do? He's out of money, and he's his friend left. Now he meets these new friends, and they're going to war. So it's like, well, maybe I don't know. Maybe I do. We don't know what happened that night, so we don't know if they convinced him, how hard it was and stuff. But either way, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Frank's in the infantry.
Right. So then they're in Egypt and they're playing rugby in front of the pyramids, which is crazy.
Well, kind of like we were saying earlier. So you're like, all right, now they're in the army. Like now the movie's going to get serious. Right. Now they're going to train, like basic training in Cairo, and the movie's going to get serious. And you're like, nope. It's now like they're having fun playing rugby, and they're going downtown and shopping and getting STDs.
I was gonna say, man, that scene where they were talking to them about venereal disease is so great. I tell you, in my notes, all I wrote was avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan.
Exactly. Yeah,
good advice.
He's like, their sergeant officer's like, you're gonna go downtown. You have some freedom. You don't want to come back with something that's never gonna go away.
Right.
They give them all a little.
You're not gonna listen to me. So here's the doctor to tell you. He's caught everything and cured everything. That introduction was just bonkers.
Yeah, it was great. But they kind of say, like, the guys when they get downtown, they're like, we might be dead in a month, and it's like, the movie hasn't played up that serious tone yet, but they're not wrong.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So they have fun. They have fun. They break some stuff at some shops.
Right.
They rent some donkeys.
They think that they get swindled, but they did, or by a different shop, or by a certain shop. They go to the shop, destroy it, then realize it was a different shop.
Right. I'm just like, you broke a lot of that guy's bowls. Like, he sells bowls, and you broke a lot of them.
That guy's not going to be able to feed his family now.
Yeah, that guy didn't do anything wrong.
But it's actually really funny that we talk about this, because I think there's a hierarchy that I think is kind of set up through this movie, and I think it really obviously plays out in the end, and we'll get to that. But I think this is a really great place to bring this in, because I talked about kind of like the rich and the poor in war, and I think that's also part of it. But I think there's even something even like kind of bigger than that. So obviously we talked about this being a British war. They've even said this isn't our war. This is a English war.
Right.
That was the line from earlier. And there are people that were hesitant about even wanting to fight for the British,
Right.
because for various
Frank.
reasons, right? And so when they kind of run into these British officers, clearly the officers are looking down on them.
Yeah.
So they rent the donkeys or whatever it is and
Yep.
camels, and then they kind of pretend that they're British and like mock the officers as they ride by them, and like the officers like, oh, look at these uncivilized Australians. Like it's this interesting hierarchy.
It is. The English are looking down on the Australians who are doing nothing but trying to help them.
Right.
The Australians are looking down on these Egyptians.
Yep.
Yeah.
Who are like, they're all thieves. They're all doing this. They're that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's just like, it's so interesting that it's just like, it's like rolls downhill.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're right in the middle of that hill with
Right.
following these Australians around. After kind of that scene, then there's this like basic training battle
Right.
simulation.
I do not get this scene at all. It's one of the weirdest scenes of the movie for me.
I would not be shocked if this is like real. Like they're just
I'm not saying it's not. It's just so weird. Like to
like
watch
what was
it.
supposed to happen? Like what was this? How was this simulation supposed to work? Because they end up just kind of like play fighting. Everybody's just like play fighting
like
and
running each other
around.
like across. It's like they've got like a line of guys laying prone like with guns, and clearly they're firing blanks because they're obviously not firing real bullets.
Right.
And like so then the rest of infantry, like because it's the light horses are the guys shooting the rifles laying prone,
against
and then the infantry are like running across this dune at them.
Yeah.
And then eventually they get into like this hand-to-hand combat fight. And who does Frank find on this line?
Archie.
He finds Archie, and it's just like this great like reunion in the middle of whatever this weird mock fight going on. So it's like cosplay, like LARPing out in the middle of the
Basically,
desert,
army LARPing. And then then you get Frank and Archie start hanging out again and racing and
but I'm telling you, when at the end of that scene though, when they're like, everything's just kind of out of control, and they're finally like, okay, everybody that's wounded, like clear the wounded, and everybody else is, whatever, and like everybody just falls to the ground and like, oh, and like, you all can't be wounded, like you all can't be bloody wounded, like that's what I like.
Yep, exactly.
And he's like, who killed you? Who killed you? Like, get up. Who killed you? Like, it's, I'm telling you, it was so weird, but it's
weird, but it kind of makes me think how like these guys aren't well trained, but we're still forcing them to go to war.
Absolutely.
Like they've been in basic training for like 2 weeks. Like they're not war ready, but they're on a timeline, and it's kind of like they need bodies more than they need soldiers.
Right, and I think that's absolutely the point. We'll get when we get to the end.
We'll get there.
When we get to the end, it's very apparent that that's the case.
But then it ends up happening after Frank and Archie are hanging out, that Archie essentially just gets Frank into the light horses.
Right.
And then one interesting thing is he's like, well, we're going to Gallipoli, but we're not bringing horses. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter if you can ride your horse or not at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we're going to talk more about this later too, about how this war ends up playing out once we get there. But anyway, I guess the next big point is they go to Gallipoli.
Right.
And there's only 35 minutes left in the movie, and I think that's counting credits when you actually get to Gallipoli. It's been an hour and a half up to this point. An hour and a half that I've loved. And then maybe the tone, this whimsical tone, just barely starts to change.
There's a drip, I think, through this movie of this like this slow burn dread that's coming through this movie. And this is when you finally like start noticing it.
Yeah, it's not full on.
Right.
But it's like
no, not at all.
Because as soon as you get to Gallipoli, you're hearing bombs drop for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
They just throw them at each other just to be annoying, more than anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, as soon as they land on the beach, not 20 feet away is a giant bomb go off, and everybody's kind of jaded to it. They're like, oh, that almost got me. And, and the people around it first, you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I guess so what, the setup, if you haven't seen, like, the Australian setup is like on the side of a mountain.
Right.
And so, like, I guess they, because they're literally, like, all their, like, I'm going to say housing, but where they're sleeping in is like built into the mountain. Like the Turks don't have an angle to shoot at them really.
Right.
So they kind of shoot over the mountain and then just kind of see where it lands. And it doesn't actually really hit them. It hits like the beach a lot, and they're not really on the beach. They're in the mountain.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting setup. Like, this Gallipoli is like, I think it's funny because it's very compressed. Like you're on the side of this mountain, then they have their trench, and the Turks' trench is only like can't remember 30 yards away.
Yeah,
So
40 yards,
it's
50,
like they're
yeah.
like really hemmed in. Like
Yeah.
they are hemmed in.
Yeah.
And they just keep on loading people up here. But well, like I was saying, the tone doesn't completely change because, you know, Frank and Archie kind of get jaded to it pretty quickly too. Like
Yeah.
this is where we live now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, I think you really feel it when they are when they're walking through the trench and there's like a body of like a Turk, or I'm guessing it's a
Yeah.
Turk that's like in the wall.
So, yeah, I don't know
And
how
his
that
hand,
happened.
yeah,
but-
the hand is like sticking out, and like guys are like walking by, like shaking the hand of the
Yeah.
dead man.
yeah,
And I feel like that's really where the tone of the movie changes,
yeah,
like, or at least where you feel that it's changing.
yeah. The weight starts coming down a
right,
lot
the
more.
reality
That's when you
sets
first
in.
kind of really introduced that. Because even before, I was just mentioning one other thing before, like this playfulness about the movie. You know, they swim in at the beach sometimes.
Yeah.
And people said, you know, before they were going into the beach, they said, you know, insurance. And it's like basically they're collecting like free parking, like in
Right,
Monopoly. Like
right.
everybody puts money in this hat, and if you get shot or hit with shrapnel or whatever, you get all the money. And it's
Right.
like, what?
Yeah.
Like they're playing a game about like risking their lives to swim in
Yeah.
the water.
Right. Yeah. It's so weird. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, again,
I mean, I bet it happened. but
yeah,
it's
and that's
this
kind of the
weird,
thing. Like,
jaded
did it happen?
playfulness.
Yeah. Like, did it happen? Like, is this really? And again, like you said, I think, you know, maybe in a different army and you know, in a different country in the world, like maybe it would feel different because of the idea that, you know, these guys didn't have the training that they needed per se.
Right.
But you know what? That's not entirely true either, because I know, you know, sometimes guys have to figure out the best way to
It's a coping
mentally,
mechanism.
mentally get
Yeah.
through the war. So coping mechanism, exactly. And this is that for them. So
Yeah, I think I haven't read a ton, but we know what I have read about the movie is like the stuff at Gallipoli is as accurate as they could make it. Like the rest, like pretty much an hour and a half before that is just fictional. These characters
Yeah.
aren't real people, but the stuff at Gallipoli was as factual as they could make it.
that's crazy.
So I imagine that's inspired at least by something that's pretty close to true. But
Yeah.
but yeah, so you know, there's this trench warfare kind of going on thing, and we kind of get, like you said, we get introduced, I think, to the seriousness of this a little bit more when Frank starts to see that hand, and I think Archie is still like he's pushing through. I think you start to see his veil of like everything's great. This is
Yeah.
exactly what I've always wanted. This is where I want to be. Like you slowly start to see that get broken down, but he's not gonna give in to
Sure.
that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, there's a little bit of lightness comes back in because the infantry finally comes in because they're
Yeah.
all going to be together on Gallipoli, and so the railway gang is what I
Yeah.
call them.
Frank's friends.
Frank's friends, the
Yeah.
railway gang, Snowy and Billy and Barney and all of them.
God bless
Like,
him.
they show up and they get to meet Archie, and it's just like it's kind of it's like Thick of Thieves, like, you know,
Yeah.
it's like everybody seems to just get along, and it's fine. And you know, I think that kind of keeps the good vibe going for about a minute or two, because then there's a really great like audience reveal scene with the officers talking about
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
plan. And I think in that moment you can tell that the Australian officers, you know, in talking to the British, understand what's actually happening.
Right.
This
What-
is where you really start seeing what's happening.
Yeah. Because it's referred to as a very important diversion.
Right.
It's like, wait, that's the name of our campaign? Like
Right.
the important diversion? You
Yeah.
know, like that's not the official name, but like, you know, that's not how you want your campaign to be described.
Yeah.
Like, what's the purpose? We're just a diversion? Like, this is not good. Like, oh, you know, they're like, there's 5 machine guns at point blank range, like right there. Like, how are we supposed to pull this off? Like, we're gonna knock them out right before you go over. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
And they're not totally bought into that.
No, definitely not. It really feels like at that point, it feels like they're just going to be machine gun
Yeah.
fodder. Like, because
Yeah.
the Brits can get on like on a beach, you know,
Yeah.
somewhere.
They
down
do
the way.
show in that scene that the watches aren't matched up. It's hard to catch at that
Oh,
point.
I must have missed that. I missed that.
It's hard to catch the first couple times I watched it, but they do kind of show like because there's that one sergeant who ends up like at the end of the movie. I think his name is Sayers, but I could be totally wrong there.
Oh, the guy who says that he saw one of the flags.
no,
like-
I meant the sergeant.
oh.
I think it's Sergeant Sayers. Whatever I think he's a sergeant. I think his last name was Sayers, but it's hard to tell in the when I looked. I never hear his name great. When I looked him up in IMDb, it was kind of hard to tell which one he was.
Okay.
But anyway, the dude that's like he ends up sacrificing himself.
Oh, sure,
as well.
sure. Okay, yeah.
So there's he's they kind of show his watch is not is a couple minutes behind, and that ends
Right.
up playing a part. But I think there's something interesting about him too, like his character, because like we said the whole movie has been pretty whimsical up to this point, but like when there is that shipping off scene, like right before the movie switches to Frank, and everybody's so happy they're on the boat, that dude is never happy. Like he has this long embrace with his wife, and he's like, she's like very nervous, and like you can see when the boat's going away, he's blowing her kisses, but he's not like he sticks out like a sore thumb in the boat because everybody's jumping and playing around, and he is like, he looks dreadful.
Yeah.
And when the leaders, like the mature, the older ones, are the ones that are like, this is not gonna be good.
Right.
Like, I'm not happy about this. That's, I think, a little bit of a clue, and then like you get a bigger clue in this meeting because he's kind of pushing back, like, are you sure? Like, those machine guns are they're pretty accurate, like
right, yeah,
and they're like, oh, you'll be fine,
yeah,
but they're not really all that fine.
Exactly, because the infantry goes first at a different location, and obviously they take heavy losses.
Yeah, I like how they play the scene because basically Archie's like, hey, when are they supposed to go? And Frank's like, yeah, about right about now.
And
then you hear the bombing, which is supposed to knock out the machine guns.
Right.
And then as soon as they go over, you hear like, they're going, and then the machine guns just go, and you just hear them getting mowed down.
Yeah. So they come back, and you find out Barney died.
Barney's goner.
Frank did find Billy, and Snowy was injured
badly,
probably fatally.
Yeah, it seems fatally. I guess
really
he said they weren't giving him food and water because they're like basically they can't waste it on somebody who's gonna croak it. And that obviously is gonna that messes with Frank. Like,
that's really where his reality sets in.
Frank's always been reluctant to be here anyway, and now he knows like, no, this ain't. Those boats ain't hitting those guns. Like we can't get over either. You know, we basically have the same plan they did.
Right. Kind of getting lulled into complicity up until this point, or whatever, and then like he sees the reality of it, where his friend is dead. At least one of his friends is dead. One of his friends is dying, and the other one is going to be mentally scarred for life.
He's gonna have PTSD. Like you can see it already. Like he's like he saw Barney die, and it's like he's not good. He's not good with that. It's gonna weigh on him for sure. And so and then Frank changes. Frank's like he's dreading, and I think there's we kind of talked about this in our pre-meeting, where we just touched on some ideas, but like this is where we kind of talk about how like the infantry and the light horses have the same mission. Like there's no more separation of class here.
Nope. It's like they're all, and this kind of goes back to that hierarchy that the British just see the Australians as machine gun fodder.
Yeah.
Like they don't care if you're from a wealthy family, a poor family. They don't care. You're just there to die so that they can do whatever it is that they want to do.
Yeah. And get on the beach.
Yeah. And it's really heartbreaking at this point because you can just see the futility in it. And you haven't even really gotten to the big finale yet, but you can see the futility building.
Well, the movie doesn't leave, like the movie does very maybe this isn't fair, but I was gonna say the movie never really made me think that Archie wasn't going to have to climb over that wall. Sure. You know what I mean? So that's the dread I think you start to feel as a viewer, like they're going to go over this wall.
I think they all are at this point. I really feel like it's not so much that you don't think that they are, you think they all are,
right? Which
doesn't necessarily end up happening.
No.
Because obviously Frank kind of confides his fear to Archie, and Archie had a great line like, no Turk in his right mind is going to waste a bullet on you, like kind of trying to make him feel better.
But you can tell the joke doesn't land.
And then Archie's recognized by the sergeant that you were mentioning, and recognizes as obviously underage. He's like, wait, I'm it's fine. And the guy's like, no, I'm proud you're here. I'm not gonna whatever. I'm not gonna turn you in or something like that. But I want you to be a message runner.
Right.
And
so I think this is a thing in trench warfare, like going from the guy who's going from the trench to base camp, the guys who aren't risking their lives.
Right.
They're giving the orders, but they're not risking their lives.
Exactly.
And he's like the messenger between them.
Exactly. But he says that, he recommends Frank. He says, Frank's as fast as me, and I got him into this. He shouldn't, have to, go down like this. So give it to Frank. And he listens to him, and then we get another parting scene with Archie and Frank, and where Frank finds out that he's got to go and be he's going to be the runner.
Yeah.
Or at first he doesn't know he's going to be a runner. He has to go.
He's like, what the hell for? Like,
Right.
he's not worried about like being.
Right. No, he did say he's a runner because then Archie says, "Can I have your luck?"
Yeah.
Has that line, "Can I have your luck?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I said, that this parting is definitely more. It's more heavy because you
Right.
feel this is it.
Yeah.
Or
Like,
it very likely is going to be it.
yeah, because I mean, we just saw the infantry had no success at all.
Yeah.
And so the idea again, we said they're supposed to take out the machine guns that
Yeah.
they all start to go over, and this is supposed to happen exactly at 5:30 or 5 o'clock or something.
Yeah.
Well, it's 1915. They don't have synced up watches by Apple, right? So, like I said, they kind of hinted at this earlier, but the sergeant is watches 3 minutes off. So yeah, those bombs go off. This time it works. The Turks scatter. Like the invasion part could
Right.
potentially work, or like be a
Right.
lot more successful than what the infantry just went over. But the sergeant gets confused about like why it's 3 minutes ahead.
Right.
And he's like, I don't, are more bonds coming? Like, are we supposed to go now? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And this delay is horribly fatal
Yeah.
to pretty much everybody because the dudes are, the dudes at base camp who
Right,
are,
the British.
yeah, they're like, go.
Yeah, you still need to go.
And he's
they're
like, well, we can't go now. They all came back. We blew our shot. No,
No.
go.
Right. Yeah.
And so they start to go.
The first wave goes, and it does
not go well.
well.
Nobody goes 5 feet.
Yeah.
It should be aborted. The whole mission should be aborted. But the dude who I want to smack around, who took the phone call,
right.
says, "I think
Snobby Brit.
I think somebody got even the relayer, like the scared like sergeants."
Right.
He's like, I think somebody got
I
a
saw
flag
a flag across. Yeah, I felt
And
like,
so
I'm
that-
like, who saw that? Like
Nobody got 3 feet.
right.
But so that was all that the dude at base camp, I think his name was Robinson, the dumb leader I wrote.
Right.
Robinson's a dumb leader. He just tells her, all right, well, one flag out there more. Keep going. And so they send wave 2, and wave 2
Mowed down.
no
Just same thing.
And this time, before, and Archie's in wave 3. So
Yeah.
Archie hasn't gone yet. Mel Gibson is like, basically Mel Gibson says like, I think he's run back and forth once
Yeah.
now where he's like, we got to stop. Like this
Yeah.
ain't going. And, dumb Robinson told, Frank to like stick it up his butt, like keep going.
Right.
And then after wave 2, Sayers, I think that's the name of the sergeant, was like, I don't want to do this. This
Yeah.
is not good.
Yeah.
And Frank gives him the idea, like, go above Robinson. Like,
Right.
let's, screw him. he doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so, again, Frank's got to run. It's like, all right, Frank's now it's save Archie time. It's like,
Yeah.
you got to get us the right information to save Archie.
Yeah.
Or otherwise Archie's going over. Frank takes a shortcut, risks his life. He passes the area, like the no man's zone. He runs through it. It's a heroic moment. He talks to the guy above Robinson. The guy says, yeah, don't send him over. No biggie. Brits are already there. They're good.
Right.
They're sipping tea and eating crumpets. This is not needed at all.
Yeah.
And then Frank's just now got to get back in time. He
Mhm.
can't take the shortcut because the shortcut is like downhill. Wouldn't work going uphill. He's got to go the long way. And he doesn't.
he just can't make it.
He doesn't have
I
enough
mean,
time.
Yep. The phone ends up. I guess they fixed the phone because
Yeah,
there was
the
a
line
phone
went down at
issue.
one
Yeah, so
point.
they got that back up, and then the British was like, "Tell him to go." But the sergeant's like, "I'm not going to ask these men to do anything I won't do."
Yep. So
Like
he
takes
goes
out his own
over.
gun, comes with him, and then Archie goes with him.
Yep.
And like he probably makes it farther than anybody else.
Sure he did. Of course he did. And literally Mel Gibson was 20 feet away.
Yeah.
Frank's 20 feet away, and he's like, no, stop. And he hears the whistle
Yeah.
that's telling them all to go over, and you just hear him go, no, and he
Yeah.
falls to his knees.
Yeah.
And then you see Archie run. And then it's cut to black. Like,
Yeah,
like
it just ends.
Archie's
It is
running,
a very
running,
abrupt ending. I will say it kind of
takes
took me
3
by
bullets in the
surprise.
chest, and boom.
I was kind of shocked how abrupt that ending
Yeah.
was. Like you got very little after that. Like it was
None.
like I think it was supposed to be like that's the shock and then you're done.
Yep.
And
Yep. And it's funny because like him getting shot is like that's the picture on the front of the box. You know what I mean? It's that like
Oh,
it looks
sure.
like it's that same running. Is he crossing a finish line or is he
right.
being shot backwards?
Right, so you don't know, but it's
So,
him
yeah.
getting shot. You ruined the movie. The cover ruins the movie.
So so like you said, just to talk about the ending of Hair here, like real life event. Obviously, I didn't really say in the before section. I kind of said, there's this campaign, but obviously this
Right.
this campaign is famous for its idiocracy
Yeah,
more
clearly.
than anything. That it was basically a sacrifice, and they had so many men die for really no good reason. Not this was not a good reason because you were fighting the Turks and somebody else's war. Not a good reason because it was an ill-advised plan,
Right.
and it didn't work out. It should have been canceled, and it wasn't. But I still think about movie making, like, because the ending was so abrupt. You're like, did that impact me? Maybe it would in the 80s, but did that impact me as much now
Sure.
as it would have then? I'm not sure. It's
Yeah.
definitely not like an NC-17 R-rated, war
Definitely
movie.
not.
That's not what
Yeah,
it's going
no.
for. Maybe you showed enough of Archie getting shot, but maybe you focus more on Frank's,
Yeah.
because Frank, he said Frank falls to his knees and we're cut and we're done with Frank. That's
Right.
Frank's last shot in the movie. Like,
Mhm.
you don't kind of zoom in on him and see his pain. They don't dwell in it, and that's what this
Right.
movie doesn't dwell in the doom.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because, talking kind of about the tone leading up to it, and maybe this is all kind of the total package, and maybe kind of going back to what we were talking about with our just overall question about,
Yeah.
like, does the tone take away from the weight?
Let's answer that
Because
now.
because if you think, you think about like a classic, like The Longest Day, or one of those, like, John Wayne, war movies,
Right.
like, those movies are framed very much from like a very kind of rah patriotic war viewpoint. You know
Right.
what I mean? Yeah, they maybe touch on like the darker side of war here and there, but overall, there's almost a propagandistic type
Sure.
element to those movies. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily as a negative, but just as
Right.
like the way that it's
definitely-
portrayed,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then, and maybe that's partially because a lot of, most of those are World War II. So obviously we look back, on that war much differently than
Yeah.
we look on different wars. Obviously it wasn't until like Vietnam where it was more like, we're going to talk about like the realities of
Right,
war,
right.
and then you think about something like a Full Metal Jacket or a Platoon, where
Right.
it's like, there are things that I could see, when we talk about the whimsy of this movie, that you can maybe draw parallels to into those, the way that your characters act in those types of movies,
Mhm.
Full Metal Jacket or a Platoon, where it's kind of a goofy, goofing around kind
Yeah.
of situation. But I think always in those movies, there is that kind of ominous undertone that's always there,
Mhm.
Apocalypse Now, those kinds of things. And whereas this movie, I feel like even in like the whimsical times, like like we kind of talked about, like the ominous nature wasn't necessarily there,
It
and
wasn't. Yeah.
no, and I'm not saying that as a negative or positive at this particular moment. I'm just saying, like, this
Right.
is kind of how it is, and so
There's no denying that. That's,
right.
That's not what the movie's going for.
No, and so it's interesting to see, World War I is a movie that, or is a war that, maybe is still kind of in some ways seen kind of like a World War II-esque type.
Yeah.
I'll use the word nostalgia. Not
It's
that
the single where the sequel was cooler kind of thing.
kind of, right, yeah. So like with World War I, it is seen as a bit more of a grittier war, where it was like, because again, you're
Trench
fought in the
warfare.
trenches and stuff like that. So it's not as romanticized quite as much as like a World War II.
Right.
So maybe with this war, they felt like they could get away with that a little bit more.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
kind of tone a little bit more. So, but after watching this movie, at least for me, I still felt very connected to the characters at the end of the movie, and I think their journey, the long journey to the war, was effective
Yeah.
for me. And even with those kind of like, not like with the whimsy that's kind of without that ominous undertone, I still felt the weight by the end.
Yeah.
So for me, I would, to answer our question, I'm going to say no. It doesn't hurt the weight of the movie. I
Good.
think
Cool.
it just kind of, it strengthened the relationship that these two characters had. So in that final parting,
Yeah.
can I have your luck? Like that,
Right.
like that line, knowing it wasn't luck at all. Like, can I
Right.
have your luck? Like what he was sacrificing and knowingly sacrificing in that moment was great.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I think because of that, like everything you just mentioned, like the movie has more rewatchability to me
Mhm.
than a movie like a Saving Private Ryan or something, where
Sure.
like there's just, those are harder, more of a dredge to watch.
Sure.
Like, and that it's effective just in a
Right.
different way. Where I like, I don't mind turning this movie on because at least for an hour and a half, I'm gonna be like, I'm having a lot of fun.
Right.
And then the last half hour, you're gonna have to grit and bear and bite your lip a little bit. But so I think it's effective in a different way,
Yeah.
but still effective.
Yeah.
So, Rob, we've got to this part of the podcast.
All right, we're here.
Where you have to now.
Did crazy Mel Gibson ruin this movie for me?
Did you like the movie, and would you recommend it to other people?
Did Mel Gibson ruin this movie for me? No, not at all. I thought he was pretty great in it.
Still is good time for him.
Right. It was still a great era. Peak, maybe not quite peak Mel, but pretty
Getting
close.
there.
Yeah. Mark Lee was great as Archie. Peter Weir is a really masterful director, and this movie proves that. So to answer your question, yes, I did enjoy Gallipoli quite a lot. Like I said, I do think that tone, that kind of whimsy, it was interesting because it was different.
Yeah,
it's different, and I think that I can appreciate different. And granted, this is 40-plus-year-old movie, so like this movie is cutting edge because
right.
No,
it's still different,
right?
Though.
But it is still different. It's still different from something that I've seen before, and so I can imagine at the time it's also different because again, like this is very much of the time of those Vietnam movies.
Exactly.
Full Metal Jacket and Platoon, like those were all coming around soon after.
It's almost like the antithesis of those.
Right. So it's kind of it's an interesting take on a time when I think war movies in general are just being reevaluated and kind of how they were portrayed, at least like how people were going to portray a war. So I think this was a very interesting take. It felt very Australian. I think that we kept talking about the whimsy. I honestly think that's because it was Australian.
Yeah.
I think there is just an inherent whimsiness to their filmmaking style, especially with the Australian New Wave, and I think this really played into that,
which I keep coming back to in my selection, so I must dig that.
There you go. So yeah, you need to keep digging. I've got a couple I will recommend as well.
Great.
Beyond that, but so yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend this movie even to people that were maybe even not necessarily like war movies,
right?
Because I think there's a lot to this movie beyond the war as well. I think the war kind of in the end is just kind of the climax, but there's so much more to it than that.
Love hearing it, guys. Write it down. Rob liked my movie.
All right, everyone, we're done with Gallipoli, but we're not done quite yet because, Ray, I got to know, what have you been watching?
Well, Rob, I've been watching quite a few things. Finished up some shows. I finished up another season of Solar Opposites on Hulu, which I love. It gives you that Rick and Morty fix between Rick and Morty seasons. It's so funny about that show. It's a pretty hilarious show. It's got that Rick and Morty vibes, but it's they have these underlying stories that've been going throughout the seasons. Like there's this little people that live. It's a long story, but but they have this long arcing story over the multiple seasons of the show. There's this space cadets have this long arcing storyline, and then the main cast, it's just always episodic. Like there's nothing really that ever goes on. It's just funny little episode after episode. I just think it's funny that they have long form storytelling within their show, but not with the actual show.
Right, it's like the B storyline is like the overarching long form storyline. That is funny.
Yeah. I finished the doc. I got to talk about docs. You know that.
I know.
That's the theme here.
Gotta.
Chimp Crazy on HBO Max. It was crazy.
And it was about chimps.
Yes, there was a lot of chimps in it. It's from the director of Tiger King, but not so trashy. There was some twists and turns that felt real and were absolutely nuts. Yeah, I'm not gonna spoil it too much, but I definitely am gonna recommend people go check it out. But one thing that kind of blew my mind is sometimes I might have a hole or a blind spot with some movies, and westerns might be one of them.
Oh sure.
And for the first time ever, I saw Once Upon a Time in the West.
Oh, okay.
And it was amazing.
All right, yeah, it is amazing. I'm frankly surprised it took you this long to watch that.
I don't know why. I only jumped to it because of on the new season of Only Murders in the Building. They talked about the first 7 minutes of it, and I'm like, I haven't seen the first 7 minutes of that.
I haven't seen in many
check that out.
It,
So I loved it. I thought auditorily, the score was just
it's Morricone. I mean, you don't get much better than that.
It was rocking. So
I remember years and years ago when I lived in Austin, because I went through a spaghetti western Sergio Leone phase, and I remember you came out to visit me one time, and we watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly together.
Did.
We totally
should have gone on a run and continued those.
I would, it's not in the Leone box set that I bought Once Upon a Time in the West, but it was a TCM staple at that time, so I got to watch it that way.
I'm probably going to rewatch it soon. I enjoyed it that much. So that was me. What about you? What you been watching?
Let's see. We took the kid to see Beetlejuice.
Ooh.
So that's the big movie that recently has come out, and it was a lot of fun. I will,
Yeah.
it was a perfect no. Does it touch the original? No, but if you walked in thinking it was gonna, I mean, I think that's on you.
It's like, come on.
Yeah, 'cause it's not gonna do it. But I think the core cast that returned, they were all the chemistry was still there.
Cool.
I thought Winona Ryder was great. Catherine O'Hara is just is a treasure. Like she's a
Yes,
treasure
absolutely.
in everything she's in. So I think I almost liked her more. I will actually go out on a limb and say I think she might even almost be better in this one than in the first one.
Wow, that's a lot.
I know
That's
that
a
might be
lot.
the one thing. I think there's an argument to be made. But yeah, I thought there was a lot of great stuff in that. It was fun. That's really all I
I heard
wanted
just a
from
little
it.
too much going on.
There is, yeah. That would be the only thing. I think there is definitely at least one or two characters that I feel like they could have cut from the movie altogether and just kind of combined the storylines a little bit,
Yeah.
and it would have been a cleaner movie in that way. I could totally see that. But again, I wanted to laugh for 90 minutes, and I did. So I think that's good. Let's see. I watched In a Violent Nature, which is I think we may have talked about this in the
Yeah.
past, where it's the slasher movie, but it's like from the point of view of the slasher.
You showed
the
me
whole
that
time.
trailer before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting concept, and I think there was some things that the movie did really well, and it does stay with the slasher for the majority of the movie. There is a story. The funny part is that it's he's watching it from afar.
Mm-hmm.
So like there's a group of teenagers or like 20 somethings that are out in the woods or whatever. So you kind of get this story, but you're getting it all from afar.
Yeah.
It's like so he's listening to them, talk
Sure.
from, and that makes it a little hard to follow. So it's almost like, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
think they're trying to make like a statement about like the story doesn't matter in these situations. But I think the problem is that I actually think that they could have had a really interesting uh, thing on, or, I guess concept on their hands if they had made you actually feel for the slasher. Really made him the central character,
Right.
and they kind of gave him a backstory, which was fine. But I just don't think they went far enough with it.
Yeah.
I think they could have. I think they really could have like hooked you into him and actually maybe not root for him to like kill these these 20 somethings because it's not like they did something wrong per se, but like at least I
Like
don't
get
know.
some kind of salvation.
Something, you know what I mean? I think there's some missed opportunities. I think
Yeah.
it was a great concept, and I totally appreciate the concept. I don't know if the movie hit in the way that I would have wanted it to.
Well, maybe when the next people who steal that idea will do it a little better.
Right, exactly. This will be the first. And the last thing that we watched is the first season of Interview with the Vampire on
Ooh.
AMC.
On Netflix.
Right. They did. AMC did a big kind of dump,
Yeah.
if you will, of a lot of their shows on AMC, and that was one of them. My wife and I are big Anne Rice fans. She's read most of the books. I've read some of them. We've both read Interview. It was our first Anne Rice book for each of us. And I will say it's a very interesting adaptation because it does something that I feel like a lot of screenwriters should maybe strive for more when they're adapting something, and that is to find the heart of what it is they're adapting and adapt that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily every granular detail.
Yeah. Don't just put the book on screen. Make it your own.
Right. Exactly. And it's but a lot of the the key stuff is there. Louis Lestat, their relationship, and how they kind of delve into it. And they kind of maybe even find some new ground
Cool.
with it, which I think is cool. They kind of change the time period a little bit and work with that. Claudia is in it, but her portrayal is different to a certain degree, and so that's cool. But it might be my favorite Lestat
Oh, wow.
that I've ever seen like iteration of Lestat
Sure.
that I've seen on screen. So I think that's pretty interesting. But adaptation, on screen is just an interesting subject to me as a screenwriter.
Sure.
It's a difficult process. I often say that you could probably teach an entire semester class on adaptation screenwriting, adapted screenplays, if you will, on LA Confidential,
Yeah.
which is one of my favorites. And again, it's one of those things, one of those movies that takes the heart of the book and adapts that,
Sure.
as opposed to just every granular detail.
Very cool. All right, Rob. Well, unlike Archie, who didn't make it to the end of Gallipoli, we've made it to the end of this podcast.
Too soon.
Sorry, had to do it. But we are done. But our listeners, they're not done. At this time, guys, we would really like you guys to like the podcast, Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Review the podcast if you can. If you leave us a 5-star review, Rob will read it out loud
At
on
some-
air.
You're putting
At
a
some
lot
point
of,
in his
you're
life.
putting a lot of weight on me. I don't know if I could do that. We will eventually try
We'll get
to
there.
do that. If there is a comment section on whatever platform you are on, by all means, leave a comment for Ray and I.
Please.
Tell us how much you enjoyed Gallipoli or didn't enjoy Gallipoli. Also, recommend a movie that Ray and I should check out, or maybe somebody else in our listening audience. We will be back in 2 weeks, and it will be back to me.
We're on a streak
We're
here.
on a 3-movie streak. I'm not going to say I'm going to push you in the next episode because I don't think I am, but I am going to recommend something a little bit out of the box.
Sweet.
So we will see if we can keep the streak alive and Ray will enjoy that movie. You will not want to miss it. So until then, this is Car Ray Rob.
Where I'm Ray.
And I'm Rob. And remember, be defined by the films you love, not the ones you hate.
Hey there, it'll be just a little while till Ray and Rob spit their spittle. Come on, check out of the hospital. So grab some of your best peanut brittle. This will be a darn good transmittal. And say hello to my little film.
All right, everyone. I want to thank you for sticking around. I want to give you a sneak peek of our next episode. I cannot tell you how excited I am for this episode. When I made my list of movies that I wanted to share with Ray, this one was one of the first ones, but I was waiting to do it because it'll be great for October. And that is because I'm going to be recommending Brian De Palma's musical Phantom of the Paradise. It was one of my favorite movie experiences within the theater, and I just cannot wait to share it with Ray. You're not going to want to miss it, so check it out, and we will see you next time.